Hello and welcome to Chillers and Thrillers Extra, paranormal stories just for my YouTube subscribers. Before we get started, please make sure to like this video, leave a comment, and subscribe to the channel. As winter reaches its peak, get warm and listen in to 3 true stories of people's ghostly encounters in the dead of winter. So get comfortable, turn down the lights, and listen in. Bare Footprints in the Dead of Winter. Submitted by user Mark is Jana. The setting of the story is around January and in rural Minnesota. If anyone's ever been around here, you know there isn't anything around besides trees, farmland, and snow in upper Minnesota. One day, about an hour before sunset, my brother and I were playing outside in the snow, as usual, and I decided I want to go explore the woods and make a fort. My brother was a very paranoid little kid, so he wouldn't come with me. As I'm trekking through our little snow-covered alfalfa field towards the woods, right in front of me is tiny, human footprints. I look behind me to see where they came from, and they came from the road. If anyone says deer tracks look similar to human feet, again, I live in rural Minnesota. I've seen deer tracks almost 100 times before that. Also, these steps looked bipedal. We have no neighbors for at least 3/4 of a mile as well. As I'm looking at these tracks, I see that they lead to the woods. I remember getting a bad feeling, but I decided to follow them anyway. No joke, I followed those footprints for about 1/4 mile into the woods. I started feeling sick as I saw the footprints crossed barbed wire fence without a sign of struggle and straight into a big brush pile of what I assumed someone dumped there at some point. Was something leading me here? I didn't want to know. I look at the brush pile one more time to see that the child's footprints never left the brush. I ran all the way home as I feel I was being watched. Thinking back on it, I wish I explored that brush pile, but at the same time, who knows what I would have found. I Didn't Have a Cat. Submitted by Anonymous. I went to college in a small colonial-era town in a rural area on the East Coast. My senior year, I lived off campus in an apartment by myself. I loved living alone, every part of it. Shopping at the nearby farmer's market, cooking my own meals, having silly themed cocktail parties, and blinking like an owl at a D.H. Lawrence novel at whatever hour I pleased. It was the best. My apartment was in a relatively modern building for the town, so 1840s rather than 1700s. And it had been subdivided into apartments in the 1930s. There were 2 apartments to each floor and 3 floors. 6 apartments in total, all with the same floor plan. The front door opened onto an L-shaped living room, dining room, with a little kitchenette that shared a wall with a tiny bathroom. There was a long straight hall that led to the back door, off of which there were 2 bedrooms, one on the right, one on the left. Each floor had a big open front porch that the 2 apartments shared and a smaller back porchlet thing that was screened in and could be reached by a rickety wooden outdoor staircase. A central stairwell led up to each apartment. The lights were always blown. The stairwell window frames had swollen, so they were stuck either open or closed. The whole thing was a serious security hazard for a woman living alone, but it was cheap and only a mile from campus. And I had 2 bedrooms and I was 20, so it was totally perfect. Except, of course, haunted. Nothing too menacing ever happened there, but every time I let myself in the front door, the house, empty, no roommate, would feel very full. It always had a waiting room feeling, like I had just stepped into a doctor's office and everyone who had been sitting there before me had turned their heads to see who had just opened the door. Sometimes I could even hear rustling, like someone shifting their weight, or footsteps, as if someone was walking away from me across the room. Of course, since there were 3 other apartments in the building, this could have been noise from another tenant. But they were quiet noises, nearby noises. They seemed next to me, not like they were filtering up from below. I slept in the bedroom on the left-hand side of the hall and kept the other, better lit room as a study. My bedroom shared a wall with the stairwell, which was open all the way to the top, and I was on the top floor of the building. Almost every night, when I was reading in bed before going to sleep, I would hear footsteps coming down the hall, passing my bedroom door, stopping at the door to the back porch, which was at the very end of the hall. I never, ever left my bedroom door open, not from the very first night. And I got in the habit of pulling my laundry basket up against the door, so if it opened in the night, I would hear the basket being pushed aside. Eventually, I even bought a sliding latch for the door at the local hardware store and installed it. After that, I would latch the bedroom door and pull the laundry basket in front of it every night. Still, I never felt really scared at the footsteps. They didn't stop at my door or anything. The knob never turned. It could have been the people living below me who had the same kind of hallway to walk down, though that's not what they sounded like. The footsteps made me uneasy, but not totally freaked out, because somehow I knew they didn't really care about me. Or my bedroom, I guess, wasn't where they were going. And once they got where they were going, they disappeared. I never heard them more than once a night, but I also never heard them when my boyfriend was sleeping over. I still locked the door, though, which he thought was really weird. The most overt ghostly thing that happened, and my only actual sighting, was after I got back from winter break. It was afternoon when I got back to town. Still light out, but winter light, so a little gray, a little flat. I turned on all the lights in the apartment to make it cheerful and put on some music. I was taking a shower before I unpacked and was standing in the tub facing the shower head, singing along to whatever was playing. When I turned to face the far end of the tub and rinse my back, I saw someone standing in the tub with me. It was only for a split second. I jumped back, slipped a little, caught my balance, and the person was gone. But the image was very, very clear. It was a man wearing a brown suit and button-up shirt. He was holding a brown hat, kind of like the Godfather hat, but slightly beat up looking, with both hands over his chest and kind of looking down at me. He was pale, with brown hair parted in the middle. He had a long nose, and he was wet from the shower spray. Water was dripping off the tip of his nose. He looked up at me, and he looked sheepish, kind of apologetic. Then he was gone. For some reason, instead of jumping out of the tub in the panic, I just said, okay, I saw you, and rinsed my hair. Again, I didn't feel very scared, just startled, like someone had played a practical joke on me. Or actually, like I had just come around a corner too fast and bumped into someone coming the other way, and we both startled each other, but neither of us meant it. I moved out that spring after graduation, and even though I live in an 1800s era farmhouse now, that sometimes feels a little bit busier than it should, I've never been anywhere else that felt quite like that apartment. It was like a way station, a place made for waiting. I wonder if the houses or apartments weren't used as a boarding house at some point. Short-term leases, people passing through. The guy in the shower had a traveling salesman look about him, a little shabby, a little provisional. He seemed like he was on his way somewhere. The only other weird thing about that apartment is that every time I think about living there, I remember living with a cat. I love cats, but I didn't have one then. As far as I know, no cat ever entered the apartment the whole time I lived there. but whenever I picture myself coming home, I envision a cat standing on the arm of the bed. Or if I picture myself cooking, I imagine shooing a cat off the table before I sit to eat down. Even when I lived there, I kept forgetting I didn't have a cat. Like every night when I would shut and latch the bedroom door, I would think, where's the cat? If I lock him in, he'll rattle the door and wake me up. Then I'd have to remind myself, no cat. But there he is in my memory. Gray cat, green eyes, white spot above his nose. I hope he's still there. The Hunting Trip, submitted by user Y4M8. Some background before we start. I live in the most northern part of Norway, which is also the most northern part of Europe. My home lies well above the Arctic Circle, which means, for those of you that are unaware, we have very short summers, where the sun never sets, and very long winters, where the sun never rises. Those long and cold months of darkness in the end and beginning of the year have made us into an understandably superstitious kind. There were many tales meant to safeguard us growing up. You have Stalo, the mountain troll who steals children who wander too far away from their home. You have the Myling, who you will not see, but you can hear it stalk you, letting out the cries of a baby. And you have the Knock, who lies in waiting beneath the surface of lakes and rivers, waiting to drown any unsuspecting swimmers. My story begins when I was 16 years old. I had just gotten my hunting license, and my father had even bought me a shotgun for my birthday. This was big for me, as I had always followed my father on hunting trips as a child, but never had actually got the chance to shoot grouse myself. My father is the stereotypical northern Norwegian. He knows everything about the outdoors, and he can endure any hardship or weather with the same unwavering sense of macabre humor. So, the time of the year comes when the sun is out for a few hours in the morning, and me and my dad take the journey to the cabin. This includes an hour driving and a further hour on a boat. You see, our cabin is in a remote area without any road access, so the only way to get there is by a ferry. This means we somewhat always know who is out there, since most people only stay over the weekend when there are no holidays, and the ferry only goes Fridays and Sundays during the weekend. That being said, there never are more than a handful of people out there at the same time, spread out on an area that is roughly larger than my hometown. This time, on the other hand, it was only me and my father taking the ferry that Friday, so I knew we were going to be left alone over the weekend. Arriving on that small pier by the cabin, I could finally breathe in the fresh air of untouched nature that has always been soothing for my soul. It's like when you leave behind all the troubles at home, because out here, they are irrelevant. At the cabin, the only things that matter is the things that keep you safe, warm, and fed. We dug out our snowmobile that was parked near the pier and drove the short trip over to the cabin. That night, we mostly spent preparing moose traps and lunch for the next day. My father told old stories of when he went hunting back in the days and such, and we shared in a ceremonial hunter's shot of single malt whiskey. I slept well that night, as I normally do when the peace and quiet of the cabin comes over me. We got out of the cabin late the following morning due to us just enjoying the calming of a morning with no obligations. When we arrived at the Lavu, imagine a winter version of a teepee, that we had set up that summer next to the lake, my father decided he would take it easy that day and get the Lavu warmed up, so that when I returned from the mountain, there would be warm food and drink waiting for me. I had previously spent a lot of time by myself around the area, so walking around the mountain alone never bothered me and still does not to this day. So I started walking up the mountain overlooking the lake. It was difficult due to the heavy snow and me not bringing my skis. Instead, I opted for an old pair of snowshoes that was hanging in the cabin. This resulted in me using way more time than needed to get up to where I could find some grouse I might shoot, as I knew from previous experience that this was an area they would be in. After a lot of effort, I made it up, and the area, despite being full of tracks, was abandoned. You see, it had snowed that night and part of the morning, so the tracks must have been somewhat fresh, yet I could not hear or see anything. So I stalked the forest upon that mountain for about an hour without any traces of light. That's when I noticed the silence. It's like what people with similar experiences say. There's always this deafening silence that preludes something bad. Like all the animals know to get out of there. I remember for the first time since childhood, I felt uneasy about being alone. But of course, I was not about to go empty-handed back to my father, so I continued. As I was walking around, listening intently to any sound that might give away any form of life, I remember being amazed at how loud my footsteps were. At this point, I was a tall yet skinny boy, around 154 pounds. Even though I walked as slow and controlled as humanly possible, the uneasy feeling creeping closer and closer to the point I decided to take a quick snack break and regain my previously calm state of mind. As I walked back to a clearing overlooking the lake, my footsteps seemed to almost lighten, and I felt more relaxed and at ease again. I sat down on a rock and ate a bar of chocolate I had brought and enjoyed the sun on my face, ridiculing myself for being spooked of what essentially was nothing. That's when I heard the footsteps, coming from the direction I had just been in. Loud and heavy footsteps of a grown man. I know this because, as anyone can tell you, the sound of a person walking on 2 feet is quite distinct from 4-legged creatures such as moose or bear, especially in heavy snow. I tried calling out because I immediately thought it was my father who had a change of heart, yet no reply. I sat there on the rock, watching the direction of the footsteps as they grew louder and louder. Several times I called out, yet I received no reply. Feeling uneasy, I decided to take out my phone and try to call my father. There on my phone, I had an unread message from my dad delivered 3 minutes ago. Coffee and lunch is ready. Simultaneously, the footsteps were somehow getting louder and louder, and I knew whatever was at the other end was not my father. This, and knowing we were supposed to be the only 2 people in the radius of many, many kilometers, made me instantly jump up. I grabbed my shotgun and noped out of there as soon as I had tightened my snowshoes. As I was making my way, all I could hear was whatever was stalking me pick up the pace. And I realized that the sound of my own footsteps and whatever it was that was after me was almost synchronized to the point that there was only a slight difference when our feet hit the ground. I realized since then that whatever it was had been following me since I had entered the forest on the mountain and was the cause of why I felt like my footsteps were abnormally loud. I remember trying my best to run in hip-deep snow, not caring that the thick layer of branches hit my cold face, leaving red marks all over it. It came to the point where I could hear the extra pair of footprints, not more than maybe 5 meters behind me. Yet when I turned, there was nothing. I pushed all I had, and when I finally managed to reach the frozen lake on the other side, from the lavvu, the extra pair of footsteps just stopped. Exhausted by the kilometer-plus run in high snow, I made my way over to the lavvu. My father seemed almost amused by how tired I was. He handed me a hot cup of coffee and asked if I saw anything. I didn't know what to say and was honestly embarrassed by what had occurred, so I said only I had spotted many tracks, yet no birds. However, In later years, I have asked him about this and other strange occurrences around the area, and the answer has always been roughly the same. Don't worry about it. Don't ask about it. Some things are better ignored. Thank you for listening. For more spooky stories and true encounters with the strange and unexplained, remember to subscribe and hit the notification bell to stay up to date to new releases.